Luke and Penelope had been married for 3 years, living in a small flat on the edge of the city. Both held down jobs. Luke was a die-hard homebody, rarely stepping outside except for work and grocery runs. Penelope, on the other hand, was always on the move, seeking out new experiences and thrills. Over time, their starkly different personalities became more evident. At first, Luke tried to keep up with his wife's energetic lifestyle, meeting her halfway. But as they settled into their marriage, it became clear that you can't change what's ingrained in someone's nature. Soon, his tendency to stay in and avoid socializing began to take over. In their first year together, Penelope persistently encouraged Luke to join her at various events and gatherings, trying tirelessly to convince him that he'd enjoy socializing more. However, she eventually realized the futility of her efforts and stopped pushing him. Instead, she simply told him where she would be on certain days. One weekend, feeling bored at home, Penelope decided to seek out new adventures with her friends. They had a vague plan to start a cafe, which she mentioned to Luke. Around midnight later that night, Luke called her and she answered cheerfully. Judging by the noise in the background, it was clear that she was no longer at the cafe. She had moved on to a nightclub, drawn in by the urge to dance. Luke was tense. Although he had never been to a nightclub himself, he had heard that men often visited such places seeking companionship for the night. Cautiously, he asked Penelope when she planned to return. He subtly hinted at what he felt was the right time for her to come home, but Penelope told him she would stay another hour or so. Despite Luke offering to pick her up, she refused, claiming she still had energy left. Fatigued, Luke unknowingly fell asleep on the couch in the living room. In the middle of the night, he woke up with a stiff neck, and to his surprise, Penelope still hadn't returned. Desperately, he called her, but she didn't answer. It wasn't until another half hour passed that she finally came home. When she walked in, Luke felt compelled to ask about her whereabouts. She seemed to be in perfect condition, walking steadily and speaking clearly. Luke wanted to blame her for staying out so late, but she beat him to it, apologizing for losing track of time and offering to go straight to bed. The next morning, Luke woke up early while Penelope slept soundly, embodying complete bliss. She had a gentle smile on her lips, as if lost in an exceptionally pleasant dream. After a while, when she stirred, Luke asked cautiously, "Did I say anything in my sleep?" Penelope smiled softly and shook her head. "I don't think so," she replied. "Why?" Luke chuckled. No reason, just wondering. Luke should have known better. Having shaken off the stress of the previous day, he was rarely one to hold on to anger for long. In fact, his mind was already drifting to thoughts of a relaxing getaway. "So, when are we heading to the beach?" he asked, his tone light and playful. Penelope's grin widened. Her husband had been diligently saving for their long-awaited holiday. They had been talking about it for months and had even chosen a beach resort. Penelope, with her penchant for luxury, had a clear preference for all-inclusive vacations. This had driven Luke to save diligently for what he thought would be their grand escape. What he didn't realize, however, was that those savings were about to be spent on something entirely different. Over the next week, Penelope's phone seemed to be constantly buzzing with incoming messages, which she would quickly dismiss. Luke made a mental note of these frequent notifications, and on a few occasions he stole a glance at her phone, but it was always empty. It struck him that she was hiding something. If she felt the need to keep it secret, it must involve him in some way. By Friday evening, Penelope was getting ready for another night out with her girlfriends at the club. Luke didn't object, but he had a plan in mind. He decided to discreetly track her movements that night, hoping to uncover who she was meeting and what she was up to. Their first stop was, as expected, a nightclub where women enjoyed free entry at that hour. Penelope and her friends breezed in and found a table. Luke arrived shortly after, blending into the crowd, keeping a watchful eye on her. She was laughing, sipping cocktails, and chatting with her friends. As the night wore on and the drinks flowed, they eventually made their way to the dance floor. At first, Penelope seemed to be acting normally. She danced gracefully, in contrast to one of her friends who was dancing provocatively with a young man. Luke frowned, filming the scene with his phone, but soon his focus shifted back to his wife. She seemed to be scanning the room, her gaze darting about, but she didn't approach anyone. Then something unexpected caught Luke off guard. A group of performers stepped onto a makeshift platform. Luke guessed they were dancers, and his suspicion was confirmed as the performance began. The suggestive dance moves hinting at undress set the crowd into a frenzy. All eyes were fixed on the performers. The men admired the gyrating women, while the women were transfixed by the central figure, a muscular man wearing sunglasses. Luke couldn't help but notice Penelope's intense fascination with the dancer. A pang of offense shot through him. It had been a long time since she had looked at him with such admiration. Was this man truly captivating her for the entire performance? He wondered himself. As the performance ended and the dancers retreated backstage, Penelope leaned in and whispered something to her friends. Their delighted shrieks followed. Rising from her seat with a satisfied grin, Penelope headed off, her friends cheering her on. She followed a man into the service area, and her departure was met with more applause. Luke stood quietly, surveying the scene, trying to avoid drawing attention from the security guard near the stage. His gaze shifted to the group of women still seated at the table, landing on Lillian, one of Penelope's friends. Lillian stood up and made her way toward the restroom. This was his chance. Luke quickly intercepted her, blocking her path. "Stop, Lillian," he said, his voice firm. Startled by his sudden appearance, Lillian froze. "I can only imagine the denial you're preparing for," Luke said coolly, without missing a beat. He pulled out his phone and showed Lillian a video of Penelope and a stranger doing push-ups on the dance floor. "Why don't we jog your memory a little? This should help clear up any misrepresentation of your story." Lillian's eyes widened with fear. "Penelope! She met this dancer before, and there were sparks," Lillian confessed, her voice shaking. I apologize. I really thought she would come clean to you," she continued, raising her hands to her face in an attempt to hide her shame. Luke's expression didn't change as he listened. It was clear that Penelope had already confessed to Lillian about her flirting and the random dances with strangers. "It's freezing, isn't it?" Luke asked, motioning to his phone, but his wife remained silent. The nightclub, once a place of excitement, held no appeal for Luke anymore. His friend's revelation had exposed his wife's true nature, and the last thing he wanted was to keep glancing at Penelope. He could have confronted the dancer, but on second thought, he wondered, was it really his fault? Penelope was the one who chose to frequent these kind of places. Who was he to examine the intentions of every man in the club? Feeling detached, Luke left the scene, heading home in a hurry. He quickly packed his belongings from their apartment, throwing everything into his car. He couldn't bear to stay in the same place as someone so fickle and deceitful. Moving out would erase every trace of her presence, and he had been wanting to relocate closer to his workplace for a long time, a suggestion Penelope had always opposed. But now, her views no longer mattered. The savings they had set aside for their vacation turned out to be more useful than he had ever anticipated. Luke found a new apartment for himself, away from the memories of their life together, and immediately began the process of divorce. Penelope tried to contact him, trying to frame everything as a misunderstanding, but the truth had already been revealed. Lillian never told Penelope that she had shared their secret with Luke. Penelope, too, didn't feel the need to explain her actions. When Luke sent the video to Nathan, her brother, the response was swift. Nathan kicked her out of his house immediately. With nowhere else to turn, Penelope offered Lillian a place to stay. After the divorce, she continued her nocturnal lifestyle, frequenting clubs and searching for something more than just fleeting encounters. Maintaining her carefree existence had become harder since her split with Luke. Nightclubs, of course, weren't exactly the best place to find long-term connections, but alongside Lillian, Penelope set out to find someone who would be willing to share more than just a single night with.